Welcome, everyone. I'm very pleased to welcome you to the presentations tonight on behalf of the gallery at Calit2. And I'd like to thank Calit2 and the director, Ramesh Rao, for allowing us to continue with this innovative programming and through a sustained level of support for the gallery at Calit2 and the incredible staff led up by our gallery coordinator, Trish Stone, and technical staff led up by Hector Bracco, and administrative staff who work very hard to make evenings like this possible. So thank you very much for coming tonight. And I would like to introduce, first of all, our curator, Amanda McDonald Crowley, and then I'll introduce Amanda, and then Amanda will come up and introduce everybody else. And I want to just say a few words just of introduction to Amanda. She has long been an important figure in the digital arts world through her directorship of pioneering new media arts organizations in Australia and the US, and through her roles as organizer and curator of numerous exhibitions, screenings, festivals, and events in New York, Australia, Canada, the UK, New Zealand, and Korea. She was, from the late 90s, director of the Australian Network for Art and Technology. She was associate director of the Adelaide Festival in 2002 in Australia, executive producer for ISEA, International Symposium of Electronic Arts, in 2004 in Estonia and Finland. And then from 2005 until just recently, she was the executive director of IBEAM Center for Art and Technology in New York City, one of the most prominent venues worldwide for the research and production of digital arts projects. In all of these venues, she's significantly helped to expand the scope of artistic production in the digital age, developing a wide range of residencies for artists in unconventional settings, such as science and technology organizations, urban streets, and virtual worlds, along with developing new frameworks of presentation and reception for these innovative works. She has worked across a wide range of disciplinary divides, especially across the arts and sciences, and helped develop new formats of interdisciplinary research, production, and exhibition, resulting in unique contributions on the order of what she's produced for us here at Calit2. So we're very pleased to have Amanda with us and to let you know about this extraordinary project, Consume. Please join me in welcoming Amanda Crowley.
Amanda, just so you know, we have Oron now online.
I was just about to tell you exactly the same thing, Hector. I was multitasking, going, all right, Oron, who's writing to me, saying, I'm listening to the stream now. I'm going, I'll tell Hector. So I'm glad we're all on track with that. Thanks very much, John, for the kind of flattering and almost embarrassing introduction. It's a real pleasure to be here working with Calit2 Gallery, or Gallery at Calit2. I believe you're going to have to change the name of the gallery soon, but I hope that the mission will remain as fantastic and innovative as it already is. Jordan I've known for quite a long time. I think we met first over dinner in New York City some time ago, and I've long been an admirer of the work that he's done. In fact, he'd worked with IBEAM long before I did on an online conversation with IBEAM and Blast that happened while I was the director of the Australian Network for Art and Technology. So I've been following his work for a really long time too. When Jordan was doing residency at IBEAM, we spoke about the possibility of IBEAM Calit2 collaborations and what that might mean in terms of a curatorial agenda. At the time, I was about to leave IBEAM, which I hadn't told him exactly. So when I announced that I'd be leaving IBEAM, I said, but I'd still love to work at Calit2. So I came down and did a site visit here just over a year ago to check out the gallery space. And whilst it's really small, I really was passionate about the agenda, but you were doing really fantastic work. And the drones exhibitions were on, and I was really compelled by that and compelled by the research and couldn't quite work out how my own research would fit in with the agenda here. Late last year, I was doing some really serious research about art, food, and technology, and suddenly a penny kind of dropped. The medical research here at the University of California, San Diego is astounding. And I was coming across all sorts of really interesting research about agricultural sciences and food sciences, and also about medical sciences. And that led me to kind of piece together this idea that I shot through to Jordan and to Trish earlier this year, and the committee agreed that would be a really interesting topic to explore here. So the artists who I'm going to introduce you to are people who I'm passionately fond of, that I adore their work, and I'm really excited to have put these 5 artist projects together in a room. The first person who I'll introduce is, I'm looking at him right here on a screen in front of me, and you'll be able to soon, is Oron Katz. Oron I've also worked with for a very long time. Oron and his partner Ionat Zurr have a project called the Tissue Culture and Art Project that runs out of Perth in Western Australia. Ionat is currently in Helsinki in Finland, because they're working on setting up a bioart lab there. They have a really fantastic installation in the exhibition that Oron will talk to you a little bit about. And I'll hand over to you, Oron, and then introduce the other artists. Oron's going first on Skype because he then has to take his kids off to school in Perth. So I hope you'll forgive him if he won't stay around for question time. Thank you. Over to you, Oron.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, or good evening, or whatever it is. I'm from the future, from tomorrow, to be exact. Yeah, it's so great to be part of the show, and thanks, Amanda, and thanks everyone else for inviting us and let us be part of it. Obviously, the topic of food seems to be something that is in the mind of so many people, and it reminded me it's kind of nice to be able to give you this presentation from my own kitchen in this context, and it reminds me of work that I've done way back in the early 90s, where I went and bought my first McDonald's, and it is preserved for prosperity. And that really signaled my beginning, and Ionat's also a beginning of interest in the idea of food as yet another intimate way of engaging with life. The Tissue Art project that we started in the mid-90s was looking at the use of tissue technologies as a medium for artistic expression. And what we've done there was to work with fragments of complex bodies maintained within a technological setting. And in the year 2000, Ionat and I were invited to come and work as research fellows in Harvard Medical School at the Tissue Engineering and Organ Fabrication Laboratory. And one of the projects that took place there was to try and fix muscles in utero. So they were working with fetal lambs, and they were harvesting muscle cells from those lambs even before they were born, in order to see if they can engineer those muscles in some way or another and reintroduce them into those bodies. But the interesting thing from our perspective was that those muscle cells were growing so fast that they started to clog the incubators, or kind of basically occupy the whole space. And the scientists that worked on this project couldn't throw away the excess cells, and she felt as if she needs something useful to happen with them. So we suggested that we would grow them into meat. And so that was the first tissue-engineered steak that we've done, and that was between 2000 and 2001. The lab that we worked in didn't have a license to grow food, so we were never able to eat this very juicy original steak that we'd grown, and we only had an opportunity to grow and eat a piece of in vitro meat in an exhibition in Nantes, in France, in 2003, an exhibition called L'Art Biotech, curated by Jens Hauser. And the piece that you see in the gallery is actually a documentation of that process. What we've done there, we were playing on also what constitutes foul food, in the sense that because the show was in France, and we know that French people don't really like the idea of engineered foods. Most other people don't really like the idea of eating frogs. So we decided to tissue engineer frog steaks. So the 3 months of the exhibition, we grown our frog steaks and we fed them every day in the gallery. We set up a fully functioning and a brand new tissue culture lab, so we can actually culture those cells without any risk of contamination or risk of having any cross-contamination with previous experiments. So everything was brand new. We set up a dining room in the lab, and we had a tank with the original frogs set up there as well. And what we've done then was in the very last day of the exhibition, we ate what can be considered to be, I suppose, the ultimate Neveu cuisine. For the 3 months of the exhibition, we were able to grow something like 4 grams of that meat. Just to put it in perspective, we used about half a liter, 500 milliliters of fetal calf serum, which is basically the blood plasma of an unborn cow that was used in order to supplement the nutrients for those cells. And this is something which is still the case when you try to grow muscle cells. You still need to use quite a lot of animal-derived materials. So if anyone tells you that in vitro meat is totally victimless, take it with a grain of salt. So in the very last day of the exhibition, we had this dinner where we served those tiny bits of cultured frog steaks to members of the audience and some people who invited to join us to the dinner. Out there, people that joined us to the dinner, I was happy to see that 4 spat the bits out. So this is also something you would see in this exhibition. You would see the leftovers, the remains, if you like, of this event in which the people chose not to swallow what we provided them. And I think it's a very important point. The whole piece is part of a series of works that we've done, which we refer to as the technologically mediated victimless utopia. And the idea there is really about the fact that we would, what we see through new technologies, and not just necessarily medical or biotechnological technologies, but Western technology in general seems to be very, very good in hiding the victims of our existence ever so further, that we don't really need to make any ethical decisions when we send our hand to the supermarket shelf and pick up a product. We tend to feel that we tend to feel good about ourselves, or at least the victims of our consumption are so obstructed that we're not even registering them as being victims. And the idea with both disembodied cuisine and the following piece called Victimless Leather was about using those very same technologies to bring about a zone in which people perceive that what they are engaging with is something, or a potential of engaging with something that reduces our violent footprint as humans, but in effect, basically just is yet another example of what we tend to do very well, and that's ignore the price of our existence. The interesting thing also is that was done in 2003, and to some extent we felt that we kind of covered this area. I must admit, personally, that was the last piece of meat I ever ate myself, and I became a vegetarian, or at least a cold-bloodtarian ever since then. But in the last couple of years, this comes back, and we're starting to develop other projects that are based on this whole idea of the in vitro meat. And to some extent, it's also because of the huge public attention that is currently being given to scientists that claim that they're doing it for real. And we've seen quite a few, and I'm sure that you are going to see very soon an announcement coming from a Dutch scientist called Mark Post, claiming that he's grown and served a hamburger-sized piece of in vitro meat to a celebrity. It was supposed to happen last year. It didn't happen. I had a bet with him that if he's successful in doing so, I'll grow a hat and eat it. So I hope that I won't have to do that. And also, there's another company coming out of your region called Modern Meadow that just got $350,000 from Peter Thiel from PayPal to try and develop an in vitro meat using tissue printing techniques. So those are areas that are really interesting to follow. The problem is that I find the rhetoric to be quite exaggerated. I think that this type of technology, this idea of being able to grow fragments of bodies outside of the original body within technological setting for human consumption of proteins is a very feasible proposition, but for an overly technologicized luxury items. So you could see this type of meat being served as novel meat. You might be able to think about the idea of growing tissues and cells from organisms that are on the verge of extinction, or maybe even through things like the frozen zoo that you have in San Diego. You'll be able to get samples of organisms that already been extinct and culture them into this laboratory version of the type of proteins that those animals might have developed in their cells if they would grow in the wild, and then consume that as a form of a novelty luxury food. So I think this whole area, and I think that the fact that what we find interesting in this case is that here we have a case where artists were growing this type of meat as a critical gesture, and now it seems to be embraced by not so much the mainstream, but the kind of the scientific world as a way of at least providing an illusion of a solution for some of the ecological problems that contemporary meat production systems provide us. Do you want me to continue? Or
No, that's it. Oron, that's a really fantastic introduction to the remains of disembodied cuisine, which is it looks fantastic in the gallery. I think you'll be really pleased. We're taking nice documentation for you, Oron. We're really sorry that you can't be here with us in person this evening, but I'm really glad that you could drop in and talk about the project. Please stay around and listen to the talks as much as you can before I know you have to take the kids off to school. So thanks very much, Oron, for this really great introduction to the project. The next artist who's going to present is Brandon Ballengée. This is the first time that I've worked directly with Brandon, and I'm really excited to have included him in this project. I've actually seen his work in exhibitions alongside Oron and Ionat on several occasions, and we met some time ago in Montreal, where he is a visiting professor of biology at one of the universities up in Montreal. He can fill you on which one, I can't remember which. Brandon's a really interesting practitioner because he's both a biologist and an artist. He's currently teaching biology courses at SVA, the School of Visual Arts in New York, as well as being a visiting biologist in Montreal. And although he works mostly with amphibians, and that's most of the work that I'd seen previously, he showed this particular, or an iteration of the work that he's got in the gallery last year at Ronald Feldman Gallery. It's an incredibly beautiful piece that instead of talking about food production and consumption in the way that Oron is talking about in terms of growing tissue engineering, Brandon's project talks a lot more about ecosystem and food consumption in a much broader and perhaps a slightly more ephemeral way, but really thinking about the health of our ecosystem. So Brandon, if you'd like to come and talk about your project.
Thank you, Amanda. That was a great introduction, and kind of continuing with the theme of seafood a bit. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about a project that I've been working on a little over 2 years involving the Gulf of Mexico, and particularly the trophic or the food pyramid in the Gulf of Mexico following the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. Now, everybody's familiar with the Deepwater Horizon oil spill? Raise your hands if you're not. Yes? Good? Okay, but as we know, the mic isn't working? Oh, I should probably stop moving so much. Okay, but we know that, the oil spill happened 2010, April, but all the oil is cleaned up, right? Everybody agree with that? Yep. I mean, it says so, right? I mean, at least BP did a really, really good job of removing the oil from the American mind. They spent more than $50 million for a large-scale public relations campaign. They paid the public relations campaign that Romney administration tried to use for the presidential campaign, so they're quite a well-known organization. Not only did they do that, but they paid literally thousands of people on Facebook to sit around on Facebook and just talk about why BP is really great and what a great job they're doing. And this is all documented now. So if you listen to Tony Hayward way back in a year ago, 2 years ago, what he was saying is that they were going to fix everything, and then eventually everything was cleaned up. Well, the reality is initially BP was saying this is a relatively small spill. Right from the get-go. It took about 3 days before they would even allow anyone to acknowledge that this oil spill was taking place. Initially, they said, well, it's probably about 2 million gallons. Well, then it was like, well, it's probably about 20 million gallons. And eventually, they said it was a little less than 100 million. Statistically, from the body of evidence that scientists were able to put together, it was way over 200 million gallons. Secondly, they used these chemicals called dispersants, a chemical called, one of the brand names is Curated. And these are basically designed to take oil molecules, break them up, and make the molecules heavy so they fall apart. The idea, the manufacturing idea, is that so it can enter the food chain quicker, so it can bioaccumulate quicker from bacteria eating this oil. But the manufacturers warned BP that using them in the Gulf of Mexico is not a good idea. They're supposed to be used for small spills under stable conditions, not under Gulf conditions. So by using those chemicals, what they literally did is make the oil and the toxic material 52% more toxic. Also, by using them, they made the oil sink. Now, was this a decision so we didn't see headlines with lots of oil-stained beaches? Possibly. And it was effective. It really worked for a long time to get this out of the American mindset. We did, however, see that over 1,200 miles were heavily contaminated with oil. Of those, more than half remain contaminated with oil. And just recently, a congressional report came out a few weeks ago saying that at least half the material is still on the Gulf floor. Some people estimate that the oil spill is now either the size of Rhode Island, and some researchers say that it might be as big as the size of Texas. So this is not an issue that's going away. This is an issue that's not going to be going away for years, decades, maybe perhaps even for generations. And what I did as an artist and biologist, I first heard about this when I was still in England, the oil spill itself. So as soon as I got back to the US, one of the first things I did is go down and try to meet people, find out who was researching what, starting to collect specimens and learn about what was actually happening. Because this is the largest environmental catastrophe in US history. And it had already at that point largely started to get out of the headlines. So it was literally disappearing before our very eyes. So from going down back and forth, I knew that I wanted to do something about the loss of biodiversity, and particularly the connection to the biodiversity of the Gulf and the local populations. The people in the Gulf live off of seafood, and about a third of the people in the U.S. eat Gulf seafood. So it's a major protein supply for our species, so very important consumable products. So this is just a visualization of what came out of about 2 years worth of work. It's literally, it's just a sculptural sketch of the biodiversity of the trophic pyramid. So this is the food pyramid for the Gulf of Mexico, but it's less than 5% of the known biodiversity. It's only about 400 and some species, 26,000 specimens. But it was an installation work. It was my kind of reaction to going down there. And I just wanted to show you a few of the elements that were included. Instead of just some of the organisms we were collecting, we also got specimens like this. How many people have heard of shrimp deformities in the Gulf of Mexico? Raise your hands. Okay, just a handful. Okay. Okay, well, you all have homework. I want you to Google shrimp deformities in the Gulf of Mexico. This is really important. Huffington Post did a really good article on this, Al Jazeera, and I met a whole bunch of shrimpers when I was down there, and this is what they were finding. They were finding shrimp with these strange lesions. A year, 2 years later, this year, they're still finding these shrimp with missing eyes, abnormalities. Like, you can see what these strange little white dots are. Actually, nobody's really sure. Right now, everybody's just calling them tumors. But definitely check into that. That's really well worth looking at. So this was one of the specimens that was included in the show. The shrimper wanted to remain anonymous, but it was really a way, I think, for people to connect directly with something that they readily eat, especially in New York. New York City, we love Gulf shrimp. So in response, the other thing is when I was down there, in Louisiana, in Mississippi, in Alabama, everywhere I would go, I would see these television ads. There were radio ads, there were billboards. Everywhere you look, something was sponsored by BP. Everybody kept talking about how, everything was being fixed. So again, this advertisement campaign. So what a team and I did is we took 10 of the most popular BP ads that they ran and literally broke them down sentence by sentence and found evidence to suggest that they're not telling the truth. So it's basically rebuting what's being said in the ads. And this isn't content that we were creating. It was content that we filtered through a little over, I think, about 24,000 pages of documents to be able to find evidence to show that they weren't telling the truth. So you'll just see a sketch of that. There's in the exhibition, there's the videos themselves, and then there's a PDF appendix for you to look through so you can see some of the articles. In addition, when I was down, I met all these people and everyone was talking about how nobody was really the media was no longer handling this information, yet there were just thousands, hundreds of thousands of people that were seeing this catastrophe firsthand, and they were really frustrated and upset that the fact that ABC News wasn't talking about it, Fox News, imagine that, they weren't talking about it. So what I did is I ended up trying to set up a kind of blog situation so people could literally submit their images and at least we could self-publish. So in a sense, it was like an electric zine or an electronic zine. And so there are about, I think there are a little over 400 images from Gulf residents in the exhibition too, and that piece is called Dedicated. So it was just really a venue for people to be able to express what they were seeing in their own backyards. To give you a sense of what this is a dolphin. A stillborn baby dolphin, unfortunately, it seems not to have eyes. So this is the kind of thing we were concerned about. What happened to the life of these materials as they make their way up the food chain? And we don't know still today. So based on this, a kind of more recent project, which is also in the exhibition, is the idea of looking at other species of shrimp. So have you all had popcorn shrimp before? Anybody heard of popcorn shrimp? Gone to Popeyes? They have popcorn shrimp festival. It's really fantastic. They're little tiny things. But nobody, as far as I could tell, no other researchers are looking at this particular group. So we just did a pilot study last fall. We collected about 700 total shrimp. Those collected from areas in Florida, which were relatively untouched by the spill, as far as we can tell, and heavily polluted areas inside of the Gulf on the Louisiana side, like near Grand Isle and areas that are kind of the classic toxic scenes, which are continuously exposed. And what we found are really shocking. We found that for the Florida specimens, a little less than 8% had physical abnormalities, and most of those were quite minor, probably resulting from injuries, things like little missing parts on the rostrum or, just broken off antennas or tail abnormalities, something like that. But the shrimp that were heavily exposed to the Curated and the oil spill were just really frightening. In fact, this is one of the most frightening ones. It's got these kind of lumpy lesions, which I believe is cellular tissue that's re-gone through a cell cycle, and it's literally started to grow legs from its tail. So not the kind of shrimp that I really want to be eating at this point. But this brings us to a really important question about safety. When I was presenting this work before, someone asked me, well, if you cook it, it's fine, right? The answer? I'm not sure. Some of the chemicals will still be there. For some of the petrochemicals to break down, they have to be at really high temperatures, and most of the time you don't want to cook shrimp to death. But who knows? But what has happened is, as a result of recent research that's happening, it's been suggested that the FDA lower their guidelines for seafood consumption from the Gulf. So just to give you an idea, this is what it's looking like, this is where it's going to be going, what the level of exposure or what they're suggesting we should be eating from the Gulf. Now, I don't know, most of the time I like to eat more than a shrimp and a quarter if I'm going to have shrimp. Now, the really alarming thing about this, for where you all are at, you probably realize this being in a coastal area right here, so you're really connected to seafood. But people in the Gulf, can you imagine, most of the people living, especially in Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, along the coast, they're surviving off of what they're able to catch. This is really like a lifeline. And so this is really going to have a dramatic impact sociologically, I think, over time, if it is so dangerous to be eating some of the seafood. And just in closing, I wanted to show you a couple of other things. One of the strategies we're now looking at for further research is using mass spectrometry from tissue samples inside of fish. We're actually trying to trace the oil spill up from the Gulf of Mexico, the way that it goes up through the Gulf Stream and then hits Europe. So we're going to be looking at fish samples from Iceland, England, France, and then see if we can find traces of that, just to see how widespread this disaster really is. And the one thing I wanted to say about this whole BP oil spill is we're right in it right now. It's all happening right before our very eyes. And it's the largest liability case in international history. This is one of the largest catastrophes, and it's also, for dollar amount, it looks like BP is going to be held accountable. Whether or not that's really the damage, it's an important factor, and that's largely been caused by grassroots organizations, literally biologists that just went down, did research they weren't paid to do, published the results, and tried to make this happen and tried to hold BP responsible. And I think that's a really important way to show that activism has a real impact on or potentially has an impact on holding corporations responsible for their actions. So I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Brandon, that's a really perfect note to finish on too, because it's one of the things for me as a curator that I'm really interested in is that, you know, you as artists are all of the people who actually can ask the difficult questions and make us really think about them and act upon the information that you're providing us. Justine Cooper is another artist who I've worked with on a number of occasions in the past, so I'm super excited to have included Justine's work in this show. This is a project that Justine did a couple of years ago called Havadol. It's a project that's actually looking at our health system in a slightly different way, and one of the things that we're finding increasingly is that it's not just the food that we're consuming that's that we're being told is increasing our health or how we live in the planet and, you know, the food that we're eating to sustain us, but ways that the pharmaceutical industry can help us to live better lives. And that, for me, that was part of a whole consumption cycle, looking at the health of our bodies as well as the ecosystems that we're living in. Justine's an artist who is both Australian and American, Australian-born and grew up here. And we met in Australia when she was studying there, and in fact also did a residency with me that was undertaken at the Museum of Natural History in New York, the first and I believe the only artist in residence at the Museum of Natural History in New York, unfortunately. About the same time as Oron and Ionat were doing residencies at Symbiotica, so there's a kind of a nice serendipity there of bringing these artists together again. So I'm delighted to welcome Justine Cooper to talk about the project and the exhibition.
Excuse me. So you've had the food part of the presentations, and now you're going to have the drug part of the presentations. Havadol is, it's going by itself. So I'll either have to talk faster or we'll start back there. The project is a marketing campaign for Havadol, the drug. So I didn't actually make drugs. I made a marketing campaign for a drug. And the reason I did this was I was inspired by this sort of the skewed expectations of medicine and the culture and marketing and pharmaceutical medicine, and in particular lifestyle drugs. So I'm not against drugs. I think certain diseases, I would be taking all the drugs I could possibly take. But the goal or the point of Havadol as art was to provide an antidote to the constant pressure and quest that we as patients and also as consumers have to lead these very happy, healthy lives, and the expectation and the duress that medicine is under to provide that. So what I quickly found out that was if you were going to create a drug, you actually have to have a disease to treat. So I had a sort of an insider friend who did drug advertising for Saatchi, and so she was the one that pointed out that I had to have a syndrome or something to treat. So what I created was DSAC-DAD, which is not a great abbreviation, but it stands for Dysphoric Social Attention Consumption Deficit Anxiety Disorder. And so DSAC-DAD was essentially, like, all those words were nothing that wasn't kind of out there already, except maybe the consumption part in actual medications that are produced. So with DSAC-DAD, I wanted to create an entire marketing campaign. So originally it was the videos, which I'm not going to show here because they're out in the hallway. So there were 4 TV ads that I created as part of Havadol's marketing campaign. And each one of those falls into a genre of actual TV ads. So the testimonial, where somebody tells you how, why they need the drug. The reminder ad, which is an ad where you never have to say all the horrible side effects of the drug, as long as you also don't say what the drug is for. So you'll see that that ad out there. And then the last kind of ad was one where they used technology to kind of either show you the disease or show you the way the disease is fixed by the drug. So the one out there that you'll see, the animation one, has a sort of psychedelic effect because this is a lifestyle drug, so you do kind of want to have some uplifting positive effects, and maybe some of those side effects are even more uplifting than you expected. So the other aspect of the marketing campaign were the print ads. So in real marketing of drugs, the print ads are the thing that they use the least because it's the lowest reach. And Have It All was I was going for complete market saturation in the sense that this is a blockbuster drug that anybody should actually need to take because it will help everybody. So in that way, I took the major readership magazines and created an ad for each of them. So this is Parenting Magazine, Cosmopolitan. So if it was for Cosmo, I made the drug look a little bit more like a contraceptive as opposed to a pill. So that is not something that Have It All claims to do, by the way. It's not a birth control prevention, but People Magazine, Rolling Stone, Vanity Fair, Vogue, Art Forum. So what you didn't know, you didn't have. So I don't know how many of you are artists, but that's the most sort of abstract one. And then there were also billboards that were created. So these works aren't in the show here, but I thought I would mention them. So these were about places that you cannot attain because they actually don't exist. So I ruined perfectly good holidays looking for the perfect beach or the perfect vista. And in the end, they're based on actual photographs with all the people, houses, and pollution removed from them. Big pills. So drugs always have a number on them that identifies them. So if you find one on your bathroom floor and you don't know what it is, you can look it up. But this one is 24/7, 365. I think you can figure out what that is. So the other thing that I included was a lot of merchandise because Have It All is really a branding exercise for the drug. So, so in the same way that luxury brands use the logos themselves to brand their product to make it more desirable, Have It All does something similar. So we need a detail, but the gold pill down the bottom is sitting on a pillow that has the chemical composition for the drug as the background, and then the hoodie on the right-hand side uses that same pattern to create the field background. So the same way that Chanel or Gucci uses their logo to brand their product and actually make it more desirable, Have It All does a similar thing. So the most important part of the project for me was the website because the other works are static, although if you're not here tonight to see the videos, you can YouTube the Have It All videos. But to me, the website was really important, partly because of the reach, but also because I was thinking about the way in which we gather our medical information and what we consider to be valid, like so where our sources of information are coming from. So with the website, when that got passed on, it exits the idea of it being an art project, and then it's asking the viewer to actually consider what they're looking at and try and ascertain whether it's real or not. And that to me became very interesting in terms of how we make those judgments. So does Mayo Clinic have better information, or WebMD, or some other kind of forum where you get where you access your information? And people didn't know how to judge what they were looking at. So it's for a man or a woman, so I made the website so that would rotate through. And what I encourage you to do when you go into the gallery is take the quiz or take it online at haveitall.com. And when you take that quiz, that will let you know whether you actually need Have It All. So the website also shows you, how the drug works. It has a 25-page prescribing information PDF on it. and it has a lot of other information that you probably should read before you decide. So there's the test. You take the test, you get a score, and then you could administer the drug right away. So I think that's all. I'm gonna leave it there, and I look forward to giving you drugs later.
Yeah, so we're really lucky to have Justine, Brandon and Jamie in the room tonight, and they'll be in the gallery too after the presentations. And Justine will be available to administer Havidol should you require it once you've checked with the survey. Our final artist tonight who's going to present before we open up for a bit of discussion and then go and check out the exhibition over conversation is Jamie O'Shea. Jamie O'Shea I've also worked with on several occasions before. He did a residency when I was the director of IBEAM, Art and Technology Centre in New York City, and then went on to work at IBEAM as our facilities manager. It was a part-time role, so Jamie was also an artist in residence in one half of the day when he wasn't being our facilities manager. He's currently working on another project where he's making solar energy, but that's not the project he's presenting this evening. You can ask him about it later. Jamie's project is also about the pharmaceutical industry, but he's interested in our health too. Jamie's going to talk about the placebo-based brand placebo project. Again, he'll be available in the gallery this evening after the talks to administer the drug and talk to you about that. But for now, I'm going to hand over to him so he can introduce the project to you. Jamie O'Shea.
Hello. So my project is called Placebo Brand Placebo, and it's a kit, a DIY kit to produce your own inert medication. It's very simple. It's just a handmade pill press and maltodextrin, which is a base for pills that has no known effects biologically, and then a hammer to compress the powder into pill form. And the reason that I went about doing this is a thought experiment to see if the placebo effect truly requires that you don't know that you're taking a placebo, or if you could, with knowledge of how beneficial placebos have been proven to be, initiate it intentionally. I imagine that most people in the room are at least somewhat familiar with the placebo effect, but its history is really super interesting, and I'm going to get into it just a little bit and talk about how it relates to my experience in the project. It's broadly considered the therapeutic effect of a medical experience by itself, in and of itself. So the experience of taking a pill, not what's in the pill, speaking with a doctor. There have been placebo effects demonstrated from injections, even from surgeries. There have been sham surgeries that have been demonstrated to have a placebo effect without actually meaningfully modifying the body, but just modifying the person's expectations about their body. This effect became a really central or crucial part of Western medicine in the 50s when a doctor named Henry Beecher went on a campaign to make it a part of the randomized controlled trial. And his experience in World War II as a surgeon was in the replacement of morphine with saline solutions as injections. So he was working on life and death operations, and his team was running out of morphine to perform these operations. And they knew that it was really dangerous to do it without them because their patients could go into shock. And obviously it's also very painful to have surgery without anesthetic. And some of his nurses tried saline solution, and they observed very tangible results that actually saved lives. And he went on to become a champion and wrote an influential paper called The Powerful Placebo, advocating that we need to prove, at least, that any medication that we bring into the world works better than a placebo. And so that's why the placebo is the control group. But the actual functioning of the placebo is a very interesting thing in and of itself, as it's important in the controlled trial too. Beecher exaggerated quite a bit, and he wasn't super scientific about the way that he sort of proselytized for the placebo effect, and there's been some pushback in the time since, but it's still a very real effect, and there have been studies now directly about the placebo effect, and not just as a side note in the test of active substances or procedures. Some of the most interesting things that we've identified are that there are real physical mechanisms to the placebo effect. So it's easy to think of the placebo effect as people just convincing themselves that they feel better, like particularly in the case of pain, it's like, oh, maybe it's a reporting error, but there are studies that show that people are initiating real physical processes in their body. And there's a substance called naloxone, which is probably a mispronunciation, that can inhibit the placebo effect. So in a trial where many people are experiencing placebo pain relief, those who were given naloxone cannot. And that showed the community that while there is, people are actually initiating a internal mechanism, and the naloxone's an opiate antagonist, which means it blocks the reception of endorphins. And this shows that the placebo effect really is doing something, but it doesn't just kill the mystery of the placebo effect. It's not like now we understand the placebo effect. There's a lot of other effects in the immune system and in neurological disorders, intestinal disorders. There's a million different things, and I'd love to tell you lots about them, but it'll take forever. I would love to tell you about them in the gallery. But there's a great quote from a guy named Patrick Wall that demonstrates how absurd it is to say that now we understand the placebo effect. He likened it to an article coming out about how scientists they now understand the source of all music and poetry because they have figured out that when they put people in a coma, and it's a very detailed description of putting people in a coma, there's no more music and poetry, so therefore music and poetry is a result of not being in a coma. And that's kind of the level that we're at with the understanding of the placebo effect. It's still quite a mysterious thing. Its physical mechanisms are mysterious, and it's cultural, and so it will always be a moving target. So back to my project. The thing that you'll see in the gallery here is this medicine cabinet, which contains the kit, and it's a quasi-religious / medicine cabinet / ad lightbox shrine. But I have been administering these pills to probably about 100 patients in various contexts. We've had placebo parties. I've done individual consultations. Some people take just a couple pills, or I've had a few people do like month-long prescriptions, which is really, repetition is by far the best way to start experiencing something with it. But I am by far my biggest patient. I've done this for, I think, 2 different runs that were about 3 months long, where I took a placebo twice a day, or as needed, and just watched to see what would happen, if there would be any observable effect from this action performed over and over again, and in tandem with reading a lot of this research to try and beat it into my head that this really can do something. And I didn't have anything wrong with me. I wasn't trying to cure something. I was just looking for an effect. In a superficial way, I definitely responded to the placebos eventually. Even just thinking about them kind of makes me lightheaded and causes me to salivate. But in general, I got these sort of narcotic symptoms, I guess, of like being very aware of the feeling of my skin and having a widened field of vision. It's really just lucidity effects, and you can get those things from standing there and paying close attention to the state of your body. But a pill is a great ritual to let you do that. The more important effect on my life of taking the placebo all the time was I realized that that's a big component of a lot of things that I do. Like, there's something called the active placebo effect or the enhanced placebo effect which is the idea that if a substance or an activity has a observable effect, even if it has nothing to do with the effect that you're looking for, that really helps the placebo effect. And so there's been studies where they gave people a medication that gave you a dry mouth, and then their placebo response was much higher, even though it didn't have anything to do with the condition. And in general, I realized that things that I take, like I smoke cigarettes and drink alcohol, and those things maybe weren't actually doing exactly what I thought they were doing. They're kind of blunt objects, and particularly with cigarettes, I mean, the physical symptoms are not that great, and a lot of what you get out of it, the benefit was just going outside and sitting there and paying attention for a second, like a ritual of relaxation. But even alcohol doesn't really, it doesn't make sense to say that alcohol makes you confident or alleviates social anxiety necessarily. It could help initiate that process, but those are really complicated things. Like confidence and topics of conversation at a party are way too complex to actually attribute to something like alcohol. And it's an interpretive effect, is what I'm saying. So that, coupled with the difficulty of attribution in everyday life in general, because we don't have very scientific experiences of our own lives, really destabilized me. And now I have fainted several times since doing this project. Could be as a result of becoming a more placebo-responsive person. It's hard to say. I also am now experiencing IBS, which I have had for a few months and is known to be a very placebo-responsive condition. I'm not sure if those things are related. I'm not a clinical trial. But basically, while I was trying to become a Superman by harnessing the placebo effect intentionally, it pretty much backfired and made me more of a nocebo responder. Like, I got more negative side effects. And I think part of that is because my project, from my perspective, lacked a human exchange. A very important part of the placebo effect is that you're going to someone and they're helping you figure out your problem, and they're giving you a diagnosis. And a diagnosis is a kind of a cure because it solves the uncertainty that makes you very anxious and contributes to medical problems. The present state of research directly on the placebo effect, within the past 3 years since I've done this project, a scientific study has actually been conducted with the same premise. They tested in, coincidentally, IBS sufferers, a researcher named Ted Kapchuk, I think, tested if, with full awareness, people could take placebos. It's called Placebos Without Deception. I have the study out in the gallery. And his results were positive. He brought people in and had a no-treatment group that didn't receive any placebo, and a group of people who were given a sugar pill and told to take it rigorously. And they did better. The people who had the ritual, even though they were fully informed that it was not an active substance, but we do know that not active substances can help, that produced in this small study a larger placebo effect than is typically seen in most controlled trials. I don't know if that kind of thing could be repeatable or turned into any kind of program, but it's very interesting. The placebo effect is about science exploring its edges in that way, and it's where it blends with culture. And so it's really tremendously interesting. And I think that there's something naive about my desire to make my own pills and be completely independent, and that even if there is a fundamental deception in exchange, because there's a decision that gets made when we talk to each other, the doctor might not be sure about your diagnosis, but he can convey some certainty, and that can alleviate your suffering a little bit. I think maybe that deception is not all bad. It doesn't make sense to completely try for full honesty. Now, for the most part, I haven't tracked my patients. I was really tremendously unscientific, But I did have a few meaningful exchanges as a result of this project. And as it turns out, it's a pretty good way to get girls. My most important patient, Elizabeth Filardi, is in the audience here. And I just proposed to her to marry me yesterday with the placebo ring, which she was a big sport and took out in Torrey Pines. So the project worked out pretty well for me, really. Daniel Moorman is a great researcher about this effect, and he has a quote about good medicine being like love, where there is a real and biological component of it, and there's also an active belief, a faith, and a naming. I think it's kind of beautiful. So that's it. Please join us for some placebos.
Well, I don't know that anybody's going to be able to top that placebo effect in the gallery afterwards. Liz, congratulations. Congratulations, Jamie. That's a wonderful way to end the artist talks. There's one artist who isn't able to present her project tonight, not just because I couldn't invite her, not just because she's not here, but because she couldn't be here. Beatriz da Costa passed away from cancer in December last year. But the project that she was working on in the last 3 years before she died, was an amazing body of work, and it was really important to me to include that project in this exhibition. Beatriz was faculty up at UC Irvine, so there was a relationship between Calit Irvine and Calit UCSD, whatever the acronyms are. And her work, in fact, is incredibly interesting in the context of all of the projects that you've just heard described. Because Beatriz spent a lot of her time over the final years of her life looking at medical research that was happening about the cancer that she was suffering at the time. And the piece of work that's in the gallery called Dying for the Other is a really poignant look at the medical research industry and the way it affects our lives and how we think about what we're consuming. She's living her daily life, and eating healthy food was a great part of that, and you'll see her preparing food in her kitchen and going about her daily life and going to the hospital to do to go through the exercises that she needed to go through for her health. But she also worked really closely. She approached a medical researcher and asked him if he would collaborate with her. And she did a lot of videotaping in his science lab where he was doing research using medical mice, where they were implanting those mice with tumorous growths from human breast cancer. And it's a really poignant look at the kind of relationship between the person suffering the disease and the animals who were being treated with the same disease in order for medical research. And I think it's a really great look at it, and I don't mean to finish on a down note. I think Beatriz would be really delighted to be in the company of the group of artists who are in this show. It's a really exciting show for me, and I hope that you'll all enjoy it. If we've got a few moments, I'd be happy to open up for questions with the artists, or how are we going for time? Jordan, Trish? Yeah, good. If the artists would like to join me for a moment, then we'd be happy to take some questions. Hey, do you want to pop the consume back up for us?
Their version's better.
Their version's better?
Yeah. It's less pixelated.
Let's get theirs on there. Oh, Hector, do you want to put your screen back up again? Because your version of the logo is probably better. It's less pixelated. So, guys, that was fantastic. Jamie, I love the proposal at the end of it. Who can top that for an artist talk?
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
And I just want to say it was a really good thing he wasn't on Have It All, because he would have bought her a really big ring, and she would have got it, and she still would have wanted a bigger ring.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
you're on the right drug.
So do we have any questions from the audience, or?
I have a question about Have It All. Did anybody come across it and think it was actually a real drug and try to contact you?
Lots of people thought it was a real drug, and lots of people were very disappointed it wasn't a real drug. I know that a number of psychiatrists sent their patients to see the show as I guess, instead of writing them a prescription. And so, so there was a lot of ways in which Havidol was used, off-label, I guess we'd say, in the drug industry, which were really wonderful outcomes for me. And there was I'm trying to remember how people contacted me, but I had a lot of comments and feedback on the drug and the way in which people used it. So it was used in lots of educational settings in high schools about ethics and bioethics and also about the health information, how we gather it. So yeah, so a lot of people did think it was real, but usually through the website, obviously not through the gallery.
It's really interesting to see the two of your projects together, Brandon, Justine, and Jamie. And it's, I just sort of just remark on some well, the way they relate to each other. In a sense, Jamie, you have Justine, you have the diagnosis, and that in the campaign helping to create demand, but ultimately no pill. You could argue that there is a pill, but I'm saying, the materiality of the pill isn't necessarily there. And Jamie, you have the pill,
Basically by itself.
through the actual materiality of the pill, maybe the need emerges and the diagnosis emerges later. So it's kind of like operating in conversely.
Yeah.
And sort of trying to think of something that connects them, and what might be an interesting way to talk about them together. And one possibility I think of is in the area of ritual. And so the ritual of taking or administering is sort of an interesting area, because what you speak to a little bit is that through the ritual emerges something of a result, some kind of effect, emerges. And I didn't necessarily know, though, Justine, in what way ritual would work, but maybe it's a sort of an offering of maybe to take up to the possibility of thinking about it in any case.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Havidol's sort of an endless quest, and that's the point, was to use humor to, probably I was making fun of myself, in the sense that you can never have enough, and how do you attain something true, and a drug cannot be that answer, except maybe placebo effect. Because yeah, early on I realized I didn't have to make a drug. I had to make a belief in, I had to make a disease, is what I had to make. And then I could make a drug to treat that disease. But
Which happens in the real world too.
yes. Well, yeah, you have to name your problem. Isn't that always the way before you can address your problem?
Yeah, right. So that's a place where they're really similar. Is glorifying the act of naming. It's and probing the act of naming.
But for me, that also then ties, that in fact ties back in lots of ways to what Brandon's addressing in his work too, is that it's the naming of the problem that's missing, because in this case, advertising in fact is providing a smokescreen. Or perhaps that's also what the Havidol campaign is doing, is providing a smokescreen, so getting to the truth of the matter, or getting to what the ailments might be, or what the conditions might be, becomes less of a problem. I mean, it becomes and maybe that's something you want to talk about, is that through getting rid of the problem, in fact, scientific research to see what the effects might be of us consuming those shrimp becomes redundant. That it's the research that needs to happen doesn't happen because of that kind of whitewashing. Brandon.
I think it's similar on many levels, because it's...
Into the microphone, because I think I'm
it's similar.
hoping we've got some online people too. So
I think it's similar on many levels to the BP advertisements. It's this idea, if you keep saying something enough, everything is fine, whether it's based in reality or not. It's just kind of this way of controlling information to the point that you're just continuously feeding it to someone so that they're just somehow okay with it. And I think that's another side. It's working in almost an opposite, because you're offering this.
yeah, into the mic.
Okay. You're offering this promise of something needed, that isn't needed. But in this case, they're offering this kind of, everything's fine, carry on. Keep calm, carry on, everything's fine, everything will be fine. We're taking care of it, it's all taken care of. So it's similar, like the way
Yeah.
that advertisement and information is collected.
Any other questions from the audience? Liz? Hmm?
I'm wondering if you guys can talk about places where your projects appeared outside of the gallery, and maybe also along those lines, media responses to the projects.
Liz was asking for anybody who is online how these projects have appeared outside of the gallery context and what media responses might be.
So Havidol has been at bioethical conferences and medical conferences. So doctors actually like Havidol because it's not an indictment about medicine. It's sort of an indictment about how we want medicine to do certain things for us. And so it's sort of a joke that one of those things could be to help us consume more. And so the only issue with something like a bioethics conference is that they never have any money because they're not allowed to take pharmaceutical dollars. So so that's why it's great to have video, because you just send the video off. But and it was also at Consumers International Conference. So it's been used in a lot of contexts where they're looking more at the ethics of advertising as opposed to medical, whether it's medically needed or anything like that. Does that was the answer to the
That's
question?
really
Yeah.
interesting that the work would be shown in that kind of context.
Mhm.
I'm honestly not sure where the placebo project has gone in the media. It's not one of my more covered projects, but it's been mostly personal interactions, I think. I've just shown it in a handful of art contexts.
Brandon, your project's been used in other sorts of circumstances too, outside of presentation even.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I should say all those works that I showed earlier were presented last summer in New York City at the gallery I'm with, and there we get a really nice media response. So in a sense, I was really pleased with that because I felt like it was in the headlines again. Suddenly, there's the BP oil spill again in the New York Times or in the Village Voice or places where it hadn't been in people's minds. We got loads of people to sign petitions at the gallery as well. And then there was information, PDFs were available through the gallery website for people to download. In fact, one of the documents, one of the dossiers was used in a court case in Louisiana. Fairly recently, unfortunately, it got thrown out trying to show that BP was not telling the truth with their ads. The attorney's going to appeal. We'll see what happens. But so it did filter out in different ways. The videos themselves were on YouTube. They got shut down from YouTube several times.
Wow.
So through social media, I don't know, I just kept sending out links through Dropbox and various venues so that it would just pop up all over the place. So it was on German television. It's going to be in this program that's coming up called Arte TV. They're covering it, which is a French-German channel. So it percolated in places that I didn't anticipate and had hoped that it would. And we're trying to do the same thing by showing the project again in Lafayette, Louisiana in late August this year and having like a, not a convention, but a symposium of not only scientists and researchers, but actually trying to invite people just to talk about their experiences and present their own evidence. So it's not just artists that are doing it or scientists that are talking about it, but how these people's lives have been changed and what they can do about it. So hopefully we'll be able to pull it all together.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting that the art project itself ends up being used as evidence in a legal case too, whether or not it's been thrown out. The fact that the research that's done in an art context has that kind of influence. And I also think that what's interesting about your project, but also in a sense about all of the projects that are in the exhibition, is that the artists aren't just making an object in any of these circumstances. They're often collating research that's been done by a lot of other people. It's been done by a whole group of people. Brandon, in your instance, in a sense, the website becoming a repository, so you're curating content, if you like, inside of your art project for other people to be able to contribute. That opens up a dialogue in a really interesting and different sort of way, where you guys aren't making an object to present. You're making a context for conversation in lots of different ways that I find really compelling. Do we have another question from the audience, or are we ready to go and look at the artworks and have a chat with the artists? Okay, well, thank you so much for everybody
thanks
for
for
coming
coming.
along tonight. It's really great. The audience is really, that's why we're here, is to show the work to you. Thank you, Jordan, and to the gallery at Calit2 for inviting me to present this exhibition. I'm really excited by it. I'm really excited to get your responses to the show now and for the next 2 months. So thank you, everybody.
Just a quick thank you to everyone for coming and speaking. It's always really great to hear from you guys in person, a little background about the work. And just a small announcement, because we're going to change our culture a little bit this evening. And instead of feeding everyone with catering from UCSD, we had one of our staff members design a specialty trail mix bar. And we wanted to make sure and let our panelists who came all the way out here for this get a chance to eat first. So we're all going to let you guys start, and then we will follow.
That's really exciting. That's actually that's a surprise treat for me too. Thank you very much, Trish. I knew she was going to do something special. I really appreciate it. Congratulations, Liz.